Hi guys. Today I'm going to tell you the story of a particularly controversial and infamous spirit called Absinthe or Absinthe, which is its original French name. This spirit is often nicknamed the Green Fairy, la Fée Verte in French, for its color and its reputation of being a very powerful psychoactive drug. And for that reason it was prohibited during most of the 20th century in many countries, including the US, France, and other European countries, even though, and I will tell you about that too, it has never been proved that it was more dangerous than any other alcoholic beverage with the same concentration of alcohol. But the point is that because it was a famous beverage among artists and writers, because it came to become a symbol of alcoholism in the 19th century, this beverage has been much vilified and criticized. This contributed to give it its infamous image and appeal too, so that even though it's a very recent beverage, I'm going to tell you about the story, but it was invented just 2 centuries ago. It has been identified with witchcraft, with hallucinations, and behind that we find many more urban legends than facts or scientific evidence. So today I'm going to talk about the alcohol itself, but also how it has been depicted, how it has been identified with this problem of alcoholism more than 1 century ago. And as we are going to see, alcoholism has always been a plague, but things were much worse in the past than today. And the case of Absinthe is also a good occasion to show how urban legends and social representations can almost crystallize around one product and lead to its prohibition, maybe with differences and to various extents. We continue to see that kind of phenomenon today. People or social groups embarking on a crusade, generally with very good intentions, to fight against a product or a cultural manifestation that to them represents or personifies everything they are fighting against. It was in the past decades things like rock and roll when it appeared. It might have been video games in the recent period, and personally, I would make other obsessions, such as the hunt for nudity in the media, in the same category when it becomes something obsessive and when people focus exclusively on this without condemning or fighting against other kinds of violence. So if we start our story, we are going back in time to the end of the 18th century, a bit more than 2 centuries ago, when the spirit absinthe was invented in Switzerland, in the west part of Switzerland, near the town of Neuchâtel, and it was formulated by a distillation of alcohol with various botanicals, in particular one plant called absinthe or wormwood. These are synonyms, and something that gives it most of its flavor, anise. The final product was naturally green, like a translucent green, the color coming from the botanicals used in its preparation, and it was highly concentrated in alcohol, 50% up to 70%, but it was always drunk, diluted. Typically 1 volume of absinthe was diluted with 3 to 5 volumes of fresh water to obtain the beverage. So in terms of alcohol concentration, absinthe, as it was drunk, was comparable to wine and contained about twice as much as alcohol than beer. There is one particular chemical compound in absinthe coming from wormwood, which was particularly controversial. This compound is called thujon and was blamed for its psychoactive effects and its toxicity. In fact, it was never proved that the concentration of thujon in absinthe was that harmful. Toxicity is all about quantities. Potentially everything can be toxic above the limits that our system can stand, and experiments have shown that alcohol was in fact much more harmful given the quantities, and that someone that would abuse of absinthe would die or suffer from alcohol long before thujon would really poison the person. In the first decades of its existence anyway, absinthe was not very famous. It remained essentially a local beverage in this part of Switzerland, and was brought to France by a man called Pernod to a city in the southeast of France called Pontarlier, where a local production started too, but until the middle of the 19th century it was not particularly successful out of its region of origin, and the volume of production remained very limited. This would change by the middle of the 19th century when absinthe was introduced to the café and restaurants in Paris, especially in this part of Paris that was called the Grand Boulevard, in the center of Paris, where the bourgeoisie, that was a fastly expanding social class, started to consume it. It was seen as exotic due to its anise taste, and it remained a very expensive kind of beverage, so that its consumption was limited to relatively wealthy people. And this is when various painters and writers discovered it, and that this myth of the green fairy, due to the color of the drink, started to emerge, with absinthe becoming one of the famous or popular drinks within the artistic community in Paris. Because Paris was an influential city, it started to spread from there in other capitals of the world, to London, to various cities in the US, to Germany too. And it also spread, but much more powerfully, to the rest of France, especially in urban areas where it became a fashionable kind of spirit. This is the moment in the years 1860s, 1870s, when this image of the green fairy was popularized, and when too the price started to drop because of a fast rise in the quantity of absinthe that was produced. In fact, between the middle of the 19th century and the end of the century, the production was multiplied by more than 50 to satisfy demand. But when it came to the consumption of alcohol in general, absinthe remained a marginal kind of alcohol. To give you something to compare, by the beginning of the 20th century, when absinthe had reached its maximum popularity in France, it represented annually about 30 to 40 million liters. That can seem to be a lot. That was about 1 liter per year per inhabitant of France at this time, but that was nothing in comparison with the consumption of wine. The consumption of wine was 5 billion liters annually, more than 100 times more than absinthe. And paradoxically, however, it is absinthe that would represent, incarnate the plague of alcoholism. Because by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, alcoholism in the Western world was a real social plague that was much worse than today. For example, if you take the case of France, but this could be extended to other countries, the consumption of wine amounted to half a liter per adult every day, together with other spirits. The average consumption of alcohol was incredibly high, and based on our current measure of what alcoholism means, probably that more than half the adult population in France 1 century ago would have been considered alcoholic. There was a fierce reaction to this problem from various groups, scientists first, especially a group led in France by Pasteur, the inventor of vaccination, who wanted to fight against this problem in order to improve health of the population. The conservative and traditional groups too were condemning alcoholism, together with the church, as it was seen as a threat to social order and families, which it was actually. There were countless examples of fathers abandoning their families every day to spend their time in bars. In France, for example, in the first years of the 20th century, there were almost 1 million bars in a country of 40 million inhabitants, and progressively governments started to endorse this fight against alcohol and alcoholism in particular. In the US, this came under the form of a general prohibition, and we know about the 1920s, the various traffics that the cinema and literature have popularized. In Europe, it generally came with the interdiction of some particular alcohols, and in France especially, and in Switzerland too, absinthe was stigmatized as the one dangerous alcohol to forbid. Why absinthe? As we said, first because it had an infamous reputation because of its composition and the presence of thujone inside it. Also because it had been growing very quickly as a beverage in the years 1880s, 1890s, and also for other reasons. First, because the lobby of winemakers was extremely powerful in France, wine was the most consumed drink in the whole country, and the winemakers attacked absinthe in priority, especially since with the drop in prices, a glass of absinthe in the last years of the 19th century had become cheaper than a glass of wine, which directly threatened their business. And maybe also for more political and social reasons, because it had been adopted and endorsed by artists or writers that were critical of the social order. Absinthe was identified with bohemian life, with outsiders, and for that reason had a particularly bad reputation in traditional and conservative parts of the society. And this led to a prohibition in 1910 that remained in place until the 1990s, which has seen the reappearance of a legal absinthe production. Absinthe has been a subject for artists, for painters in particular. There is one famous painting by Edouard Manet showing absinthe drinkers that condemned this habit of drinking alcohol in general, and you see in this painting the sadness, the loneliness of characters that are prisoners of their addiction. As absinthe had been now forbidden, the production dropped dramatically. It almost disappeared, and other beverages were invented to try and replace it. The most famous and popular one, in France at least, would be pastis, which has a relatively close taste to absinthe, a taste dominated by anise, and is also a spirit that you dilute in fresh water, and that started to take off in the 1930s and the 1940s, and to this day remains really popular. What changed with the consumption of pastis is that the ritual to prepare the drink is different. In fact, absinthe was prepared with special glasses that received the spirit, and a special fork was placed with a sugar above the glass, and the fresh water was falling slowly on the sugar, which dissolved the sugar, and the mixture of sweet water fell progressively in the drink. And in order to prepare it, objects such as water fountains designed to serve absinthe were very common in French bars at the beginning of the 20th century, before they disappeared. given the lack of scientific evidence against absinthe, it was progressively reintroduced since the 1990s and is now legal again in the US and in every European country, even though the maximum quantity of alcohol and thujon are closely regulated, but it has lost most of its infamous appeal. What remains is essentially a drink that once was identified with artistry, the bohemian life, and artificial paradises that artists, poets, writers were looking for on the bright side, and on the dark side, identified by many writers, such as Zola, for example, as a social plague contributing to the misery of the working class that could search for oblivion, stupefaction in alcohol. If you have an opportunity to try absinthe, I think it's a curiosity and it's worth a try, but drink it with moderation, of course. This is it for today, my friends. I hope you found it interesting and that I will see you soon for another topic. Bye bye.